We'll wait just a few minutes. I see lots of people connecting to audio. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. This is being recorded and live streamed, which you received a notification about, but just to let you know, you all have been muted on entry, but please feel free to raise your hand or put a note in the chat, and we're happy when we go to the question and answer period to unmute you and have you speak to our wonderful panelists directly or in the chat, whichever way you would prefer today. So I'm Lua Hancock. I work with the Holocaust Memorial and Research Education Center of Florida in Maitland. The Holocaust Center's mission is to take the history and lessons of the Holocaust and to use those lessons to build a just and caring community free of anti-Semitism and all forms of prejudice and bigotry. As part of that mission, last year, the Holocaust Center launched the Take Action Institute. That institute is a place for programming, education, and resources for people who want to make purposeful and production action in their communities. Part of that Take Action Institute is a youth empowerment program and a youth conference, which we hosted last year and will be hosting again this year on February 4th and 5th of 2023. One of the programs that we try to do in the Take Action Institute is to respond to current issues and ongoing issues and give people strategies for action. And the way those work, like the ones we're hosting tonight, is that we kind of try to focus on three things for the attendees. One is to provide factual information. Sometimes it's hard to know the sources of where to get the correct data or the correct studies or the correct knowledge on a topic. Then also to provide with that some emotional connection. How does this impact people? Why does it matter? And then share some strategies for action of what you can do next. So we're grateful that you're here and that you're willing to take action after this time. I think this week I've been contemplating what a poignant time this is in our history. In past strategies for action sessions that we've held, you know that we've talked about some of the bills that are colloquial known in Florida as the Don't Say Gay and the Woke Act that were passed recently, and we've had some sessions to talk about those as well. And yesterday, the Supreme Court overruled a New York law that required an application for carrying a weapon outside of the home. And as part of that application, there used to be required some explanation as to why concealed carry was needed. So with this overturning, there will be impact on other states that have similar laws. And it's interesting that this was the first Supreme Court decision on gun rights in approximately a decade and allowed for more flexibility with gun carry. And then I think it's important to recognize that today the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. So there are large decisions that are being made in our state and in our country that impact our community. And I've heard many people asking if these decisions that are made by our representatives and appointed officials are actually representing the will of the overall populace. And what do I do if I have an opinion different than what's been dictated for me? How do I make change in my own local community? And many of us are aware that these decisions almost always have a disproportionate impact on the already marginalized populations in our communities, including members of Native and Black communities, women, members of low-income communities, survivors of trafficking and violence, and members of the GLBTQ population. So I think it's important to recognize that we know that because of systemic issues of racism and inequity around economics and issues around gender identity, that usually there's a lot of disproportionate impact of some of these situations. So tonight we ask you to engage with us, that if you have a different opinion than someone else here, that's great. We ask that you focus on the issues and not individually attacking or addressing any individual person, but that you feel comfortable in a respectful way to express your opinions. We also hope that this becomes a brave space for you to ask any questions. And if you want to do that anonymously, you can just send me a private chat. You don't have to put it in the chat and I'll ask that question on your behalf. But I think it's important that there aren't a lot of places where you can say, I'm not really sure what I think about this, or I'm torn about this, or I don't have enough facts. And we want this space to be a space where on this issue, you can bring that up. So I'm thinking today, maybe with all that's been going on in our community over the past few months with shootings and legislation, and many of those shootings being tied to racialized violence, that we just take a breath together for a second and connect with our bodies and our hearts and our minds so that we can spend this hour together learning and planning and plotting and making friends and learning about resources. And I'm so, so grateful to all of you who came, and also to our wonderful panelists. They're going to give you very diverse perspectives on this issue. They have lots of diverse backgrounds and experiences, which is great because it's not, a very simplistic issue for us to discuss. So as usual, when we do these Take Action panels, they are moderated by a youth moderator. We are grateful to have a youth moderator with us today. Sophia is a rising senior at Lake Highland Preparatory School. She's a passionate community organizer focused on grassroots organizing, voting rights, and on ending gun violence. She serves her high school program as the director of March for Our Lives Florida and the Florida High School Democrats, in addition to being the chapter lead for both organizations. Sophia has also been a member of the fundraising committee for the Take Action Institute, and also for the High School Democrats on the financial side as well, which is a key thing. So I'm going to hand this over to Sophia.
Thank you, Lua, for the introduction and those moving remarks. It's true, we're experiencing a time of fast and impactful political and social change. It can be really shocking, and it can feel like we're moving backward, especially as students, since we're too young to vote, but often we're treated as pieces on a political chessboard. While it can be hard not to feel hopeless, it is important to learn how we can take action in order to create positive, progressive, and lasting change in our communities. In order to learn how we can take action, it is important to look to the experts in our community. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our three panelists for the evening. First, Kevlon Kirkpatrick. Kevlon Kirkpatrick has over 23 years of experience working as a law enforcement officer. He is an adjunct instructor at the Valencia College School of Public Safety, a facilitator with the Peace and Justice Institute, and a member of the Creating Resilient Community Network. Kevlon holds a Bachelor of Science degree in finance from the College of Staten Island. He is certified by the Office of the Attorney General as a Florida Crime Prevention Practitioner, a Florida Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Practitioner, and a School Resource Officer. The Valencia College Criminal Justice Institute has also certified him as a physical fitness trainer, a general instructor, and a defensive tactics instructor. He is also a certified racial intelligence training and engagement instructor. Kevlon has completed the Peace and Justice Institute Facilitation Training Level 1 qualification course. Kevlon has instructed for business and legal resources. He has facilitated the Florida Crime Prevention Training Institute, the Florida Crime Prevention Association Conference, and several of the national conferences on preventing crime events. He is committed to collaborating with community stakeholders and is passionate about nurturing environments focused on inclusiveness, equity, and respect for all. Kevlon, could you share just a little bit about your experiences?
Thank you very much, Sophia, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, as she said, it's kind of weird hearing your bio be read to you, but it's kind of cool also. So I served as a police officer for almost 24 years, and in that capacity that I was in the community involvement section, and I was thrust into a situation where citizens and businesses and churches were asking for workplace violence active shooter presentations. So I immersed myself in that subject matter and began to take as many classes as I was providing. So to the point where I was providing 200 to 500 per year, which is a lot. And I was also doing this on my own time and stuff like that. And while doing these presentations, I began to see the emotional contagion that people were giving me. And I noticed that a lot of these people were being traumatized by the subject matter, not what I wanted to do. So about 7 to 8 years ago, I began to, with the Peace and Justice Institute and the Creating a Resilient Community Network and the School of Public Safety, which is actually the police academy, I began to take classes on adverse childhood experiences. And I began to merge those two subject matters together because it became evident to me that a marginalized community is a traumatized community. And people needed a heck of a lot more love than they did an active shooter presentation. So I began to work from the perspective of love and compassion instead of power. And I was more interested in allowing the people who were closest to the pain to provide me with the insight that they had into the subject matter of violence and/or workplace violence or active shooter. And I began to see things differently. So with that said, communities that are rife with violence, poverty, discrimination, lack of economic resources, poor housing quality, I began to see those were communities filled with trauma. So they are experiencing gun violence to an extreme that most of us aren't really talking about. Yes, we talk about it in reference to Uvalde and Pulse and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, that high school, but we don't talk about it in reference to these communities. And that's when I began to do a lot more presentations pertaining to adverse childhood experiences, in particular, positive and adverse childhood experiences. So what I would say to you or anyone that wants to take action going forward, understand ACE, know your own ACE score, whether it's a 0 or a 10, and 10 is the highest that you can get based upon the 1995 to 1997 study that was originally conducted. Know your ACE score, become trauma informed and trauma aware, and understand that time in and of itself does not heal all wounds. Time with the proper intervention and self-care does. Also acknowledge the fact that people do not live in the past. It's not scientifically possible, but the past lives within us. That's factual. There's a reason why your doctor asks you, does your family have a history of X, Y, and Z when you go get your physicals? And hopefully you're able to go get your physicals. And I began to share the fact that it's okay to not be okay. It's 100% okay to not be okay. In fact, it's quite normal not to be okay, especially in this polarized environment that we live in, where everything is on social media. And we see such civil discourse amongst people who are supposed to be professionals and we're supposed to look up to, and they can't work together or have conversations. So I applaud the youth that are actually taking action. And I have learned a heck of a lot more from youth than I have from my peers. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevlon. In addition to that, would you be able to put that survey and just drop the link in the chat when you have a chance? Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'll get it and I'll drop it in.
Okay, sweet. Next we have Itunu Ilesanmi. Itunu Ilesanmi is a PhD candidate in the Public Affairs doctoral program at the University of Central Florida. She received a master's degree in social work and has another in public administration from Savannah State University. She has worked with various programs and organizations to help foster community engagement and social change. One of these programs includes the Day of Hope, Healing Oasis for Peace and Empowerment, championed by the youth of a Boys and Girls Club in East Orlando. This project, in collaboration with 2 other professionals from UCF, is centered around fostering youth voices to advocate against gun violence in the community, especially in marginalized neighborhoods. Itunu Ilesanmi's interests also extend to working with nonprofit organizations, returnees, and other displaced groups. Her dissertation focus is assessing the barriers to reintegration among refugees in Nigeria affected by conflict and violence. She hopes that her research findings will serve as a foundation for developing an intervention that will address the issue of reintegration. Itunu, if you could just say a few words.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. Like Sophia mentioned, my name is Itunu. I am from UCF, and working with 2 other professionals, we had the opportunity of working with a wonderful group of 15 young men during this spring semester on a project that actually started before the COVID-19 pandemic. And that one was centered around intergenerational excuse me, it was centered around intergenerational mentoring, where one group of Boys and Girls Club actually help another group on matters that pertain to social emotional learning. hit with the tragedy of gun violence, we had to change the entire project. And that's what birthed the Healing Oasis for Peace and Empowerment. That's the Day of Hope that we had on June 11th. We had a walk from the Boys and Girls Club downtown Orlando to Lake Eola, if you're familiar with the Orlando area. When it comes to gun violence, it's a conversation that we've been having, the whole nation has been having over a few years. And having had this conversation with this youth, they were interested in doing different things to first commemorate the death of their friend or part of the member of the Boys and Girls Club. Some wanted to do a wall of fame of images of people who had passed away due to gun violence. Some wanted to write out policies but didn't see themselves fit enough to do it. Some even wanted to have guest speakers come around in the Boys and Girls Club to, talk to the youth. One of our students was really interested in the book We Beat the Streets and wanted to invite some of the people that wrote it, those authors, to come and speak to them. They wanted to do a drive around the neighborhood, just something that will, impact their community. And that's what led to this community event, the Day of Hope, to address the issue of gun violence among individuals. And their focus was on youth, because nowadays, because of peer pressure, because of different situations, we see youth getting mixed up in wrong crowds. And, when it's not a positive group, when it's not a positive collaboration, it ends up in dangerous activities. And so that was their passion, to be able to say, no, we don't want this kind of activity. No, we want to make right choices, and we want to stop the negative effect of gun violence in our community. So that was some of the things that, fostered the Day of Hope. Through this project, we had a lot of research experiences with the youth. They're very passionate about it, wanting to know, okay, what are the gun policies available? How can we change it? What can we tell people? How can we, bring about this change? We had them, go through a few series of classes, discussion, and we came up with something they call the 3 C's. And that's something that's centered around cohort, compassion, citizenry, how to work together with one another, because, it doesn't have to always end up in fights. It doesn't always have to end up in arguments. There are better ways to handle situations, especially among youth. And then understanding team partnership and things like that, and their stand as citizens of both the nations and individuals in their community. So those were things that was centered around the Day of Hope. They also wanted to pick mentors, youth mentors that were examples in their community, because this is something that they wanted to do. With their participation, we were able to have a marketing communication team, and these students actually produced great work. The program was a success. It was carried on the news and things like that. Just giving youth that voice to be able to make that community change was some of the things that were very pressing. When we look at data, when we look at statistics, we know that high amount of individuals actually die as a result of, when it comes to gun violence. About 49% in 2020 of the total amount of people that were affected died due to gun violence. Then 53% due to suicide. And when you read deeper, you find out that the presence of a gun in a home, or the presence of the gun in an environment, makes people more likely to die by ammunition than it will if they didn't have it. And that's a conversation that we usually have. And people want to have a gun for protection, but like one of the news persons said, if you have a hammer, everything you look at will look like a nail. You want to solve this situation with what you have, and instead of just taking other rational decisions, that you want, okay, this is a problem, I can solve it with this hammer. And it doesn't always work like that. So those were conversations we're having while working with this youth. And I think as individuals in our community, even though accessibility looks like one of the biggest reasons why gun violence is continuous in our environment, there are other ways that we could handle this situation. So I look forward to the conversations that we have, the questions that will come forward, because this is a conversation we should be having. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist that we have is Aston Mack. Aston Mack is the founder of Orlando Freedom Fighters, or OFF, an organization born in the protest movements of summer 2020. OFF raises awareness about injustice and advocates for research-based strategies for advancing effective policies in our communities. Aston works behind the scenes in an on-the-ground struggle for racial justice, economic and environmental equity, and an end to police brutality and gun violence. Aston has helped assemble and give tours of the mobile installation, the Hall of Injustice, which educates the public about the history of massacres and ongoing police violence against Black people in Orlando, Central Florida, and beyond. Aston streams interviews with subject area experts, advocates, and activists through his Twitch, Aston Mack TV, and has been featured on several platforms and podcasts such as Pardon the Heme-Terruption and Psychosocializing. Aston, if you could just give us a few words.
Yeah, I'm not really great at the whole like coming up with a bio thing, so my apologies for that. I do have a background. I also am UCF alumni. Go Knights. When we talk about gun violence, and I want to talk about my experience with gun violence, I always start by saying this: I shouldn't exist. What I mean by that is I had friends that were shot and some were killed at Pulse. I was in Las Vegas, in the bar, in the front of the hotel when the Vegas massacre happened. I live in a city where we had last year a triple murder by a drive-by shooting. These statistics are horrifying, but if I simply lived in any other country in the world, it would be impossible for them all to happen to a single person. We need to start having an honest conversation about what is going on in our country. We have a homicide count on an order of magnitude higher than any other country. It's about 44 times as much. We have over 3.5, when we talk about gun violence and we talk about the economic breakdown, we have over $3.5 billion in medical costs, $10.7 billion in police and criminal justice costs, $0.5 billion in employer costs, $51.2 billion lost in work loss costs, $214 billion in loss of quality of life, all from one thing: gun violence, and it doesn't exist anywhere else. We need to start having an honest conversation about what this means. We've tracked it, we've seen it. If you go and look, we have a epistemological study that features over 130 different studies looking at all of the gun violence laws, all the gun restriction laws in every single state. And it's clear, when we restrict gun access, we increase life. When there's less access to guns, there's lower suicidality. There's lower crime in general. But we also have to remember that guns are a modifier to crime. Sure, you may get robbed, but you won't die. That's another part of it. Gun violence actually is about, I think, 70 to 80% of the total amount of homicides in this country. That's why even though knife, battery, and physical violence is on the decline, homicides have actually increased for the first time in years, and it's 100% due to the increase in gun death. These are the things that we need to confront and we need to talk about. Now, it is a multifaceted problem, okay? To say that it's just one thing or another thing would be incredibly disingenuous and lack the nuance that we have in this conversation. We know that crime, for example, is driven mainly by an inequality. It's mainly driven by, if you have two neighborhoods, the difference in the values of the homes in those two neighborhoods, as well as the distance of those neighborhoods from each other, actually is the most accurate predictor of crime. But gun access is the best predictor of the outcome of crime, which is death. And that is things that we need to tackle. So we need to attack systemic inequality. We need to attack, if you look at Dr. Sierra Carter's work on race-based trauma, we need to attack this because not only is it leaving a scar for those people that were immediately harmed by the gun violence, but those who just simply see the images of gun violence and how it's disproportionately Black and brown communities and poor communities that they see and are represented in these gun deaths. Sure, we talk about mass shootings. That's a thing that we definitely need to tackle. We're a country, we make about 70% of the mass shootings in the Western world. That's a problem, absolutely. But that's just a minuscule part of a much larger issue of interpersonal gun violence where only 1 to 2 people die. When we're talking about domestic abuse in the home, most gun violence happens from people who have had domestic abuse charges on their record, and we still let them have guns. So there's so much to talk about here, so many different angles that we can go ahead. We can talk about what's effective policy, what things you can go out and look for in both your municipality, your state, your country. But there's also other ways to attack it too. How much help and how much assistance is going to those communities of needs in your neighborhood? Look at programs that can reduce things like functional family therapy, for example, that we know reduces recidivism and violent rates in communities by nearly 1/3. You know, we need to stop beating our heads on the ground and using solutions that we know are tried and haven't worked, and start having an honest discussion about things. One of the things that was brought up earlier, and I wanted to comment on, is one of the things we need to break is this cult of gun culture that we're in, where we tell ourselves things like guns protect us. Did you know that the most generous estimate of crimes prevented by gun owners is 1.9%? Only 1.9%, and that's the most generous estimate. It's a CDC study, and it doesn't have a lot of controls. Most estimate, it's far less than 1%. When you're telling yourself what does increase when you have gun ownership is the rate of death inside of that home. It increases by an order of magnitude. You are more likely, by putting a gun in your home, to die by a gun than ever be protected by it. We need to break these cultural ideologies that we've been passing on for generation and generation, and trying to tell ourselves that these ideas are safe or sound, and that these are tools of heroes and protectors, when they're just not. Look around the world. We've solved this problem everywhere but here. And it's time, maybe after tragedy after tragedy, after losing loved one after loved one, maybe it's time we started solving those problems here too. And that's what I got to say on it.
Thank you for those remarks. Thank you guys for being here as panelists and for sharing your experiences with us. Now we're going to open up the floor to questions from the audience. So we'll start with a few. And if anyone in the audience just wants to ask anything, please just submit them in the chat. It should be in probably the middle of the bottom of the screen. Great. So while we wait for some to come in, I just had a couple. Specifically for Aston, I was really intrigued by that tangent you went on the cult of gun culture. I was just wondering, how are some ways that we can break it, both through like legislation, but also just socially and within the American psyche?
I think that we need to be honest about what guns should be for in our country, right? If you want to use guns for recreation, for example, like hunting, there's no need for you to have things like ammo in the home. That's one of the ways that Iceland, for example, that has a similar rate of gun ownership to the United States, one of the few places in the West that does, is able to curb their gun violence issue over there. So when we talk about like, what are we really using these guns for? How can we actually achieve those goals while minimizing the harm that they do, and discuss it that way, and also, like I said, break a lot of these ideas, and that just comes from education. You know, becoming more educated, being more aware. I mean, right now with the lift on the ban on researching into guns, which if people were unaware, there was actually banned for I think 2 decades, 3 decades, the Brady Law or whatever, that made it so that we could not actually do research into it. And now that that's been lifted, we've been doing a free-for-all in both sociology and psychology, experimental psychology, and seeing what are the outcomes of both gun policy, gun laws, and just access to guns in general, and what works and what doesn't. And that's, I think, where it starts to break the culture, when we start talking about facts.
Great, thank you for that. Just a question to all 3 panelists. What books do you guys recommend to look at all of the aspects of the issue of gun violence?
I would say I read a book, Tribe. It's about an individual that goes in and delves into certain former military personnel, and understanding. It started off with guns, but then it delved into connection and human connection. And it talks about the self-determination theory, which states that human beings need 3 basic things in order to be content. They need to feel competent in what they do. They need to feel authentic in their lives, and they need to feel connected to others. I think we live in a country, like Ashton said, and so did Itunu. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. We live in a country that guns are an unfortunate norm, if you will, and that's hard to break. And I don't know if we're ever going to break it, but I think we need to expand our culture to be one of compassion and empathy and truly caring for other people, and sitting down with people that you don't necessarily like for whatever reason, or don't necessarily have normal conversation with, a normal interaction with. I think we need to get out of our comfort zones and learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that a lot of people like to be comfortable. It doesn't make you bad, it makes you normal. And understand that we have certain people have a bias toward guns, or a bias toward not having guns. And we have to understand what a bias is. It's an inflexible, positive or negative, conscious or unconscious belief about a particular category of people, places, or things. So like Ashton said, I think we have to expand that.
I completely agree. On that note, could you repeat the title of the book that you had previously mentioned?
Tribe.
Trial?
Tribe, Tribe. And there was a question. What age should we start talking to kids about guns and how to view them? How should we approach it? I don't have kids, but I've helped raise my nieces and nephews and my godson. I started having my nephews and nieces and my godson help me clean my weapons when they were about 10. And all we did was break down empty guns and clean them. And we talked about the ramifications of dealing with the gun and pulling the trigger. I didn't take my godson to a gun range until he was 19. My nephew, I'd never taken him to his father's a police officer. I come from a family of police officers, so my 2 younger brothers are cops. So my nephew's in the Army. He's stationed in Korea, but I never took him to the gun range. My brother never took him to the gun range. He had no desire. My nieces don't have a desire, but I just started talking to them about it at 10. I started off with a plastic weapon, and I talked to them about the fact that once you pull the trigger, there's no "I'm sorry." And this is, I told them about the dangers of it. And I never really, even with my girlfriend's son, I don't watch violent movies with him, ever.
If I could add to that question, Kevlon, I will say as early as the children start speaking, 2, 3, because of the recent situations where we see children accidentally shoot somebody, and we see children become interested in toys that, have to do with when children start showing interest in toys or TV shows that have to do with a form of violence or anything. I think the conversation is due, because We do not want accidents. We do not want any mistakes or any, oh, I was just playing with it. Because sometimes people are careless with their ammunitions in the house, and it has always turned out to be negative.
I wanted to jump in here because there are a couple of really good points. When we're talking about children, you need to, I want to second the idea that we need to start talking about it as soon as possible. There's a reason for this, by the way. It isn't just conjecture. Actually, as of 2020, from the ages of 0 to 19, guns are actually surpassed cars as the leading cause of death. Okay, so if we are going to have children in homes with guns, it's important, it's imperative that we start speaking about that first. One of the things that Kevlon had brought up was that we need to put aside our differences and our specific biases, which is incredibly important. And one of the reasons why that's so important, we don't disagree. When we actually do polling and we actually look at what the country wants, whether you are right or left, we actually find that background checks is something that we all agree on. And yet, even though I think it's 90%, when polled, over 90% of constituents want that, it is not something that's getting passed in the Senate and Congress. And that specifically has to do with the fact that in this country, there is a disconnect between what the people want and what the government actually does. And that's when we can talk about how you can get involved with your local electoralism or your statewide or federal electoralism, speaking to your congressperson or your senator. Make sure they understand that when they don't represent you, they lose their jobs, because we can walk across the aisle. I don't think that any responsible gun owner that may have contrary views to myself on gun violence disagrees that people that have assaulted people in the past shouldn't have guns. People with mental health problems shouldn't have guns. So it should be something that is so simple for us to walk across the aisle and do. But for some reason, in this environment that we have with this toxic polarization, it seems unable to get done. And that's sad. And that's where one of the ways that we can start. As Kevlon was saying, we need to start with love and compassion and understanding each other and working towards a common goal. And that needs to be said a little more often than we do, that we are working towards a common goal. We want our country to be safe. We want our children to grow up healthy. We want every day to not be filled with terror and destruction and violence in the news. And that's something all of us can work towards, right?
Thank you all. So our next question is going to be, are buyback programs successful and a viable or cost-effective part of the solution? If so, how and when could they be properly implemented? And if people don't know, buyback programs, I believe, are when you kind of like exchange your guns to, I believe it's law enforcement, and in return would get money. Going to Aston.
So it's complicated. With gun laws, especially in the United States, the reason why it's complicated has to do with the fact that we have different states with different gun laws. If we had a federal buyback program, it would be fantastic. We've actually seen examples of this. For example, when we look over at Australia as the most recent country that had a very, very large gun culture, and they actually did a buyback program. There's a large misnomer, and I want to make sure everybody understands this. Gun buyback programs do not have the goal of buying back 100% of the guns. In Australia, they estimate they only got 15 to 20% of the guns, and yet we see the effect of the policy on the decrease in gun violence and gun death. It's the knock-on effects that we're looking for, not necessarily perfect worlds where we're able to snap our fingers and get every gun off the streets. That's never going to happen, and that's unrealistic. But there are other effects to policies besides what's just written on the paper. And that's what's important to remember. And again, we can talk about Australia's buyback program, or you can talk about the UK's straight up ban. Or these laws work, and they've worked for a very, very long time in many places, including here, by the way.
Yeah, I have participated in several buyback programs. Ashton's making a very good point. What happens is, probably since 1998, I've done at least one a year. We get several hundred guns, but that's not, like Ashton said, that's not really, I don't know that the objective is to buy back all guns. I don't think that we could, but we do get a lot of weapons. And is it cost effective? Most of the money, not all, but a lot of the money comes from the private sector. Like, for example, Walmart, Publix, Dunkin' Donuts, or whatever, or sporting goods store, or even local athletes like Magic players who donate several $100s or several tickets to a game or whatever. So you get a lot of guns, and fortunately, you're sometimes able to clear crimes because some of the guns, because there's no questions being asked, right? So you're able to get weapons or guns that were used or rifles that were used in crimes, and you're able to solve crimes. But I don't necessarily, to Ashton's point, I don't know what the overall objective is. I can tell you that most of the time that we've done them, I've retired over a year ago, but most of the time when we did them, it was like an 8 to 12 hour event. And you probably, the most I can remember, I think was like 900. But remember, when they're done in Central Florida, I can't speak about the rest of the state, but you'll have every major agency in Central Florida doing it at the same exact time. So you're getting maybe 200 here, 300 here, 1,000 here, 400 there. So you're getting a lot of different weapons, and you're able to clear cases from time to time.
Just to add to that, with my research on conflict and violence, I'll say in a corrupt system, the buyback programs are not successful, especially when leaders are in partnership with people that are perpetrating the crimes. It is not successful. It can be maybe the whole ideology, or not maybe, the ideology behind it was to be able to curb the situation, but in systems where there are, you know, modes and things like that, that are in partnership with those that are perpetrating the crime, it has shown not to be successful.
Great, thank you.
I wanted to comment on that point real quick. And exactly, that's exactly why I said that if you do a buyback program, it needs to be nationally mandated. And so a lot of these laws and policies, the way that they're set up in certain places, they're doomed to fail because they are set up in systems that are corrupt or broken themselves, which is why it's important that when we execute these with the strategies that have worked, not just flying from the hip and thinking that we can come up with our own ideas on ourselves. And I very, very much love the truth of it, because we have seen gun buyback programs that have failed, because ultimately, when you're in bed with the drug dealers, when you're in bed with the criminal element, when those are the things that line your pocket, well, then you're going to look the other way when you know that the guns aren't getting off the streets. Because the thing that makes the gun buyback work is a follow-up ban on the guns themselves. That way, when we see guns in public, we know that there's no more question. Are you a good guy? Are you a bad guy? I don't need to think about that anymore. I just know you have a gun, so you're in the wrong. And that's when they become actually effective.
Great, thank you. So our next question is going to be that many people want common sense gun laws. Will that be possible with the NRA having so much control?
I don't know about the other two panelists, but I don't know. I think if common sense were common, we wouldn't be here. But I don't really know. I pray. I'm hopeful that we will have. I think using the term gun laws, I think words are very impactful. I think we have a lot of laws on the books right now that don't mean anything. I like gun regulations, just common sense, like Ashton was saying, common sense things that can be implemented that everyone wants, every single person wants. So I don't know. I'm hopeful. I'm not pessimistic. I am hopeful, but if common sense were common, we really wouldn't be here.
I think to that point, and let's just call it what it is. Okay, we live in a political system where the corporate monopolies run our politics. The NRA, as even Republicans will tell you, do not represent individuals and gun rights. They mainly represent the gun manufacturers. And that's what's giving them their lobbying power. It's not just in the NRA. We can talk about Facebook, Twitter, Google. We can talk about the big pharma. We could talk about all these different things that are social issues that are happening in our country as the result of very few lobbyists having the majority of power over the people in this country. So it's not so much a question of like, would the NRA, yeah, the NRA will crush it. That's contrary to their goal. Their goal is to increase the sale of guns. That's, if you haven't figured that out, I told you, I let the secret out there. But the question is, when are we going to take control of our political machine so that we can oust these powers from controlling these very few people from controlling the masses? And that's where the issue kind of lies. And that's where, if we can do maybe some anti-corruption and politics laws. I think again, this is another one where I think there was a poll, I think it was like 96% of Americans think that the government's corrupt. I mean, that's not a Democrat or a Republican stance. That's just we know what it is sort of stance. So that's where you kind of attack that problem. And whether it'll happen, well, like, I'm not a religious person, but I pray to, you know?
Thank you. So we have about one or two student questions, but before we move on to those, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. How can students take action in kind of holding their legislators accountable in anti-corruption?
I can start with the accessibility to call your legislator. And that's something that we did with the youth. Their phone numbers are there. Check your county and make the call. You can reach out to them. Maybe you accept or you don't accept a policy. Just say that will help youth understand that they have a voice. And when we say youth, let me extend youth to voting aged youths so that they are aware of what they can vote for, who they are voting for, so that it will stand on what they want to see happen in their communities.
Agreed. I also say meet with your city commissioners, county commissioners, city and county mayors as often as possible, and go into those meetings fully aware and studied on the subject matter that you'd like to have a conversation, and develop your own action plan. I think that the youth, especially youth, you all are a heck of a lot more exposed to things that we weren't exposed to as a child. So I applaud you all for being in these positions, but don't look to us for the answers. I think we messed this up. I'm 55, so I think that we messed this up. So I say to you all, you come up with your own action plan and see what action plan these local officials have, and see if you can collaborate. Collaborating is one of the best ways to come up with a solution or solutions.
The best way I feel to do a lot of political action, especially when we're talking locally, because that's where you're going to have the most powers in your municipality, where your vote matters the most and your influence matters the most. We talk a lot about the ways that government fails us, which is unfortunate because, you know, I'm a lefty. I love me some government, but we have to admit when it's not working. When it's not working, what we can do is we can construct what we call parallel structures. When the government isn't servicing the community, it's time for the community to get together and service itself. Create structures that the government should. And you know what's funny? The government, they like credit. So as soon as you create that system or project or group that's working and doing the work, they'll take it, they'll copy it, and they'll take it and send it everywhere, and they'll pretend it was their idea. We all know that it came from you, but they'll pretend it's their idea. And at the end of the day, if we're being pragmatic, that's a win, right?
Itunu, were you saying something?
No, I was nodding to what he said, that it's a win-win. The government likes credits, people will take the credits, so everybody wins at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we had one question that was kind of along the same lines, but I guess from more of a policy perspective like that, how do we, oh, actually, before we how do we like pressure politicians, both like within the political structure game, and then also if you guys could share some examples of those parallel structures that you've helped. I think it was Aston that said that you specifically have helped create within our community. I know there's a little two different questions, but
Okay. As far as parallel structures goes, for example, I work at the Resilience, one of the Resilience hub spots here in Orlando, where we've known that there's been a water and air quality issue in Orlando since, Luana says, since 2006. We've petitioned the government multiple times. We've asked them, the study would cost anywhere between $100,000 and $125,000. We've asked them a bunch of times. They'd sooner build a statue with the melting body for global warming than actually fund the study, even though they've promised us all this time. So what do? Well, we use the Resilience Hub as a way for us to capture the funds necessary to execute the study ourselves, because once that information is out there and transparent and we make it available for everyone, it serves the exact same purpose. And what purpose is that? Well, that gets back to part one. Embarrass your elected officials. Show them with irrefutable data, show them with irrefutable proof that what you're saying is true. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and I don't want to get into personality issues or picking on people, just know that the older you get, the longer you've had those ideas. And sometimes that means you're a little set in your ways. That's the nicest way of putting it. So sometimes it's up to us to show them these new ideas and put this new information in front of them. That doesn't mean they're always going to be receptive. That doesn't always mean that they're going to do what you want them to do, but it is the step in the right direction, because now once we get this air and water quality study done, we don't need the government. We'll have other groups come in and want to execute upon that data. Matter of fact, that'll prove that, for example, we're looking at carcinogen-based disease in the area. And if we find that we have bad air quality, well, look, we'll put 2 and 2 together and we'll go around the city and go straight to the state. And those are the ways that you can try to kind of help levy power in your community by still servicing the community, because that should be where you put the forefront of what your efforts are. I think, listen, there are a lot of politicians out there I very vehemently disagree with, even, as you guessed, ones in this city. I don't know how effective it is to simply scream at them or point and shout. Now, there is a time for presence, there's a time for action, there's a time for marching. I will never suggest doing anything lighter, but I'm also saying that I don't know how effective those strategies are in getting the people with the power to do what we want to do. Instead, what we've been finding, like I said, is creating structures on our own and simply embarrassing them, doing their jobs better than they can do themselves. That's, it's a desperate situation, but you got to do what you got to do, especially when people are dying, right?
Just to buttress Aston's point, he mentioned something about having data right. You write, a lot of us are online now, write your blogs and, send a copy to their offices. It actually gives yourself sound in that office. So write as much as you can.
I want to thank our panelists. The ending statements that have been made are so powerful. We got to get to work. You got to roll up your sleeves and get in the community and know the community and do the data and do the research and show people the data and lift up the voices of people who are being impacted by the issues and work every day for change like that. Again, to Aston's point, that doesn't mean there aren't times for marches and there aren't times for continuing to, try to engage your officials. But there's also in our community, and some of the people here have done some of that wonderful social justice and equity and response to the community work that's happening right now that is changing lives every day on the ground. And I think when I feel hopeless, sometimes doing that work alongside my community is the thing that makes me feel the most hopeful, because there are so many people with so many assets who are underestimated by our political society. And we say that they're powerless because the system has taken a lot of their power, but the reality is internally they have lots of power, and when they are able to make some change in their own community, it's really powerful. So I thank you for that. I'm going to put in the chat a quick survey, because we have so many grants, et cetera. We do like to collect data on what's happening and how it impacted you. So please
I
take
would
a few
love to
minutes
fill
do
out your
that.
survey. I would love to fill out your survey. Also,
Thank you.
I think the best way to prevent gun violence is to give everyone a gun. I think
Thank
that
you.
we can. That's what we need to do. You know,
Thank
as
you for
as a
sharing.
victim of I was in a school shooting in Louisville, Kentucky. Somebody came in there and I just wish that the whole class was armed. You know, would have stopped it.
Thank you for coming. I'm sorry to hear about you being part of that situation. We have multiple people here today who have shared also, you know, their experiences in that way, that they were part of experiences. So I appreciate at the beginning, Kevlon mentioning that there's emotional trauma and potentially to some people who are here that we're not even aware of. Kevlon, at the beginning, when we weren't on screen yet, we were meeting ahead of time. You shared a statement that stuck with me, something about how, you know, what has gotten us here in history won't solve the next issue, but you said it in such a wonderful way. Do you remember what you said that you could repeat to us?
No one can solve the same level of consciousness that created it.
Can you say it one more time? You broke up right at the beginning.
It's actually Albert Einstein. No
Ah.
problem can be solved with the same level of consciousness that created it.
Fun fact, Einstein was a socialist.
Well, when you talk about socialism, saying I pledge allegiance to the flag is a socialist concept. Public schools are a socialist concept.
Not really, but sure. I think I understand what you mean, though.
Highways, Medicaid, Medicare, unions.
Well, I want to, and also, can I invite the panelists to put, if you want, your contact information in the chat? That's up to you, but some of you do amazing work in the community and some students on here might be willing to volunteer or to connect with you more. So if you would like, please feel free to put your information in the chat. I'm so grateful that we came together in a space where we don't all have to agree, but hopefully we learned something that raised our consciousness, to your point, Kevlon, and made us able to attach this issue with a higher level of knowledge and consciousness than we came into it with. As we always suggest in the Take Action Institute, find the thing in the community that you're passionate about, learn everything that you can about it, listen to voices other than your own, and decide of a specific way that you and your community can take action. So I'm so grateful to our panelists for being here with us tonight. And thank you, Nancy, as well for your comments. So thank you all so much. Keep an eye out. This will be recorded. The video will be posted on Monday on the Take Action Institute and the Holocaust Center website. So if you want to share it with other people who couldn't be here this evening, please feel free to do so. And please keep an eye out for more sessions like this in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.